The police officer's flashlight cut through the darkness like a blade, illuminating her mother's face behind the dumpster. She was crouched in the alley 3 blocks from their house, her pink nightgown soaked through with melted snow, her bare feet purple and swollen with cold. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees, and she'd been missing for 4 hours. When her daughter called her name, "Mom, it's me, it's Sarah," the mother looked at her with the hollow, terrified stare of someone looking at a dangerous stranger. Her lips were blue, her whole body shaking violently. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. "I want to go home, please. I just want to go home." Her daughter knelt beside her in the dirty snow, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces, each one cutting deeper than the last. This was the woman who had kissed her scraped knees when she was 5, who had stayed up all night when she had pneumonia at 12, who had known her face before she even knew her own. This was the woman who had taught her to braid her hair, who had helped her pick out her wedding dress, who had been the first person to hold each of her children. Now she was staring at her daughter like she was a predator, pulling away from the outstretched hand as if her touch might burn her. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that seemed to muffle the sound of her breaking heart, and she could see her mother shivering so violently that her teeth were chattering like castanets. But she wouldn't let her daughter near her. She wouldn't let her daughter save her. The officer helped her daughter coax her into the patrol car, speaking in the gentle, practiced voice of someone who had done this before. As they drove the familiar streets back to their house, past the park where her mother had pushed her on swings, past the school where she'd volunteered for 15 years, past the church where she'd sung in the choir, the mother kept asking the same question over and over. "Where am I? Where am I? Where am I?" Each repetition felt like a small death. Her daughter wanted to tell her she was safe, that she was with her, that everything would be okay. But her daughter knew, sitting there in the back of that police car with her mother, who no longer knew her name, that nothing would ever be okay again. Because in that moment, she realized she had lost her mother forever. Even though she was sitting right next to her, breathing alive, her heart still beating in time with hers. But to understand this moment, it's necessary to go back to the beginning. If this story touches your heart, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone on this journey. Every like helps us reach more families living this silent reality. Margaret, the mother, was the kind of woman who remembered everything, as if her mind were a vast library where every moment was carefully catalogued and stored. She knew the birthday of every neighbor on their street, the anniversary of every family loss, the exact date and time when each of her 6 grandchildren had taken their first steps. She could recite phone numbers from 30 years ago and tell them what she'd worn to her daughter's high school graduation without even pausing to think. Their kitchen always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, brown sugar and fresh bread, the scents that meant home and safety and unconditional love. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like teddy bears and butterflies, and stories about her childhood in County Cork, Ireland, told in her lilting accent that never quite disappeared despite 50 years in America. The first signs were so small, so seemingly insignificant, that the family actually laughed them off. She'd forget where she put her reading glasses, then find them on top of her head. She'd start to tell them a story she'd already told 3 times that week, then stop mid-sentence with a confused laugh. "Oh, you know what I mean," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively. She'd call her daughter by her sister Emma's name, then by her granddaughter's name, then correct herself with a frustrated shake of her head. "I'm getting old," she'd say with a self-deprecating smile. "My brain's going soft." The family told themselves it was normal aging, that everyone their age had parents who were getting a little forgetful, a little scattered. After all, she was 68. Wasn't this just what happened? But then came the morning that changed everything. Her daughter was getting ready for work when her phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Her mother's voice was small and frightened, like a lost child calling for help. "Sarah," she said. and her daughter could hear that she was crying. "I'm standing in my kitchen, and I don't know how to make coffee. I'm holding this mug, and I'm looking at the coffee maker I've had for 15 years, and I can't remember how to use it. I can't remember how to make coffee." Her voice cracked on the last word, and her daughter could hear the terror underneath the confusion. That's when the family knew this wasn't just age, wasn't just normal forgetting. This was something else entirely. This was the beginning of losing her. This was Alzheimer's. The forgetting started like a slow leak in a dam, small drops at first, then a steady trickle, then a flood that swept away everything in its path. First, she forgot her daughter's husband David's name, calling him that nice man or Sarah's friend. Then, she forgot her granddaughter Emma's birthday, the date she had circled in red on her calendar every year since Emma was born. She'd stand in the grocery store aisle, holding a shopping list written in her own careful handwriting, staring at it like it was written in hieroglyphics. "I don't remember writing this," she'd say, her voice filled with growing panic. "This isn't my handwriting. Whose list is this?" The progression was relentless and cruel. She forgot how to use the microwave, then the television remote, then the telephone. She'd pick up the receiver and stare at it, pressing random buttons, unable to remember the sequence of numbers that would connect her to another human voice. She started getting lost in her own neighborhood, the streets she'd walked for 30 years, suddenly foreign and threatening. Her daughter would get calls from concerned neighbors. "Sarah, your mother is standing in our driveway, and she seems confused." Each call was like a small funeral, mourning another piece of her independence. If you know someone caring for a family member with Alzheimer's, send them this story. They need to know their love matters, even when it feels invisible. Share so more caregivers feel seen and valued. Their family gathered for what they thought would be a normal Sunday dinner, but nothing was normal anymore. Her mother set the table for 12 people instead of 6, carefully placing plates and silverware for guests who existed only in her fading memory. She insisted that her own mother, who had been dead for 20 years, was coming for dinner, and that her sister Mary from Boston would be there too. When the family gently reminded her that Grandma was gone, that Mary lived in Florida now and couldn't travel, she looked at them with such wounded confusion, as if they were being deliberately cruel, as if they were lying to her for some malicious reason. The doctor's visits became a blur of tests and consultations, waiting rooms filled with other families facing the same slow catastrophe. "Early-stage Alzheimer's," the neurologist said, his voice matter-of-fact, as if those words could somehow make sense of watching your mother disappear piece by piece. He was kind but clinical, explaining the progression, the medications that might slow the decline, the support groups and resources available. But nothing could prepare them for the day she looked at her daughter, really looked at her, tilted her head like a curious bird, and asked, "I'm sorry, dear, but could you remind me your name?" Her daughter told her she was Sarah, her daughter, and for a moment that felt like an eternity. Recognition flickered across her mother's face like a candle flame in a strong wind. "Sarah," she repeated slowly, testing the word on her tongue. And then she smiled, the same radiant smile she'd given her daughter when she was 5 years old, and showed her a crayon drawing of their family. "My beautiful Sarah," she said, reaching out to touch her daughter's cheek with trembling fingers. "My sweet girl." It was the last time she would ever say her daughter's name with recognition, the last time she would look at her and see her daughter. After that day, her daughter became a kind stranger who visited regularly, someone she was polite to but didn't really know. The hardest part wasn't the forgetting itself. It was watching her try so desperately to remember. She'd sit for hours, staring at family photographs, her finger tracing the faces as if she could somehow touch the memories back into existence. She'd pick up her daughter's high school graduation photo and study it intensely, then look at her daughter with heartbreaking hope. "This girl," she'd say, "she looks familiar. Do you know who she is?" She'd ask her daughter to tell her stories about her own life, listening with the careful attention of someone trying to memorize a foreign language. Her daughter would describe her wedding day, the birth of her children, her proudest moments and her deepest fears. She'd nod and smile, but her daughter could see in her eyes that these stories felt like someone else's life, like tales from a book she'd never read. The questions became constant and heartbreaking. "Where are my children?" she'd ask. "When are they coming to visit?" Her daughter would explain that she was right there, that she was her daughter, but she'd shake her head with patient confusion. "No, dear," she'd say gently. "You're very kind, but I'm looking for my real children. Sarah is about this tall," she'd gesture with her hand, "and she has curly hair like mine used to be. She's probably at school right now." Each time she said it, her daughter felt herself disappearing a little more, erased from her mother's mind like pencil marks on paper. Her daughter started carrying old photos everywhere, hoping something might trigger a memory. She'd show her mother pictures of them together, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, vacations, and watch her face for any flicker of recognition. Sometimes she'd smile politely and say, "What a lovely family. They look very happy." She was looking at pictures of her own life, her own children, her own joy, and seeing nothing but pleasant strangers. Caring for her mother became like living in a house that never truly rested, where every moment held the potential for crisis. Sleep became a luxury her daughter couldn't afford. Every night brought new challenges that left her exhausted and afraid. Her mother would wake up at 3 a.m. thinking it was morning, shuffling to the kitchen in her nightgown to make breakfast for children who were now adults living their own lives. Her daughter would find her standing at the stove, trying to crack eggs into a cold pan. Confused about why nothing was cooking, she'd wander the halls in the darkness, calling for her husband who had been dead for 8 years, her voice echoing through the empty rooms like a ghost's lament. Her daughter installed motion sensors in every hallway, turning their warm family home into something that felt more like a gentle prison. Door alarms that would sound if her mother tried to leave. Locks on the kitchen cabinets where they kept the cleaning supplies, child-proof latches on the medicine cabinet. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was baby-proofing a house for the woman who had once baby-proofed it for her. Each safety measure felt like another small surrender, another admission that the mother she'd known was slipping away. The medications sat in neat rows on the kitchen counter like tiny soldiers in a losing battle. Morning pills for memory, afternoon pills for anxiety, evening pills for sleep. Her mother would forget she'd taken them and take them again, or refuse to take them at all, convinced that her daughter was trying to poison her. Simple tasks that she'd done automatically for 70 years became monumental challenges requiring patience and strategy. Helping her shower meant coaxing her like a frightened child, explaining step by step what they were doing and why. Getting her dressed meant laying out clothes in order and helping her remember which arm went in which sleeve, which foot went in which shoe. The daily routine became a complex choreography of care. Wake up before her mother to prepare breakfast she might not eat. Lay out clothes she might not recognize. Guide her through brushing her teeth, washing her face, taking her pills. Every meal became a negotiation. Her mother had forgotten she liked scrambled eggs, would push away the toast she'd eaten every morning for decades. Her daughter would find plates of untouched food hidden around the house, spoiled and forgotten. She was losing weight, growing more fragile, but she couldn't remember being hungry. Slowly, inevitably, friends and family members began to disappear from their lives like morning mist. At first, they'd visit regularly, bringing flowers and forced smiles, their voices artificially bright as they tried to have conversations with someone who could no longer follow the thread of thought. They'd ask her about her garden, and she'd stare at them blankly. They'd reminisce about shared memories, and she'd nod politely, clearly having no idea what they were talking about. The visits became shorter, less frequent, until they stopped altogether. "It's too hard to see her like this," they'd say. as if their discomfort was somehow more important than her need for human connection. She's not really there anymore, but she was there, trapped inside a mind that was betraying her, still capable of feeling loneliness and fear and confusion. She just couldn't express it in ways they could understand anymore. Her daughter found herself becoming both daughter and mother, caregiver and patient, the responsible adult in a relationship that had been turned upside down. The woman who had once packed her lunches now needed her daughter to cut her food into small pieces. The woman who had taught her daughter to tie her shoes now needed her to help her with the most basic tasks. The reversal was heartbreaking and complete. Her own life began to collapse under the weight of her mother's needs. Her daughter had lost 20 pounds from stress and exhaustion, her clothes hanging loose on her shrinking frame. Her children, her mother's grandchildren, barely saw her anymore. She was either at her mother's house managing her care or collapsed in her own bed, too tired to be the mother they needed. Her marriage was strained to the breaking point, conversations with her husband reduced to logistics and arguments about her mother's future. "She doesn't even know who you are anymore," David would say, his voice gentle but firm. "Maybe it's time to think about a facility. There are good places, professional staff who know how to handle this." "Why, but how do you give up on someone who gave you life? How do you walk away from the woman who never walked away from you, even when walking away would have been easier?" The accusations started small, but grew more vicious with each passing week, like a poison that spread through their relationship until it contaminated everything. Her mother became convinced that her daughter was stealing from her. First small things like her favorite earrings or her reading glasses, then bigger things like her checkbook and her social security checks. She'd hide items around the house in places that made no sense. Jewelry in the freezer, important documents in the cookie jar, then accuse her daughter of taking them when she couldn't find them. "You're not my daughter," she'd say, her voice cold and certain, her eyes filled with suspicion and anger. "My daughter would never treat me like this. She was a good girl." The paranoia was the cruelest part of this disease, more devastating than the memory loss itself. The woman who had raised her daughter to be honest and kind, who had taught her that family was everything, now looked at her daughter as if she were a criminal. She'd call her other children in tears, her voice shaking with rage and fear, telling them that her daughter was abusing her, that her daughter was keeping her prisoner in her own home, that her daughter was forcing her to take medications that made her sick. She'd tell neighbors that her daughter was stealing her money, that her daughter wouldn't let her eat or see her friends. Her daughter's sister, Emma, flew in from California after one particularly desperate phone call, her face tight with worry and barely concealed accusation. "What's really going on here, Sarah?" she asked, as if her daughter hadn't been sacrificing her own life, her own health, her own family to care for their mother. "Mom says you're mean to her. She says you won't let her leave the house. She says you're trying to put her in a nursing home so you can take her money." Each word felt like a physical blow, especially coming from Emma, who visited twice a year and called once a month. The family began to fracture under the weight of her mother's accusations and everyone's guilt about not helping more. Her daughter's brother Michael, who lived 20 minutes away but rarely visited, started questioning her decisions. "Maybe you're being too controlling," he said during one tense family meeting. "Maybe she needs more independence." It was easy for him to say. He'd never spent a night wondering if she was going to wander outside in her nightgown, never had to clean up after her when she forgot how to use the bathroom. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when a social worker showed up at their door. Someone, her daughter still doesn't know who, had called Adult Protective Services, reporting suspected elder abuse. As she sat at her kitchen table, trying to explain her mother's condition to a stranger who looked at her with professional skepticism, she felt like she was drowning in an ocean of bureaucracy and suspicion. The woman, Ms. Rodriguez, took notes about her mother's bruises, from falls her daughter couldn't prevent despite her constant vigilance, and her weight loss, from meals she refused to eat no matter how much her daughter coaxed her. If you know someone caring for a family member with Alzheimer's, send them this story. They need to know their love matters, even when it feels invisible. Share so more caregivers feel seen and valued. "Mrs. Patterson," Ms. Rodriguez said, her voice measured and clinical, "we need to consider whether your mother might be better served in a specialized care facility. Sometimes family caregivers, despite their best intentions, can become overwhelmed and, well, situations can deteriorate." The words felt like a knife twisting in her daughter's chest. After everything she'd given up, after all the nights she'd stayed awake watching over her, after losing her job and her social life and her peace of mind, she was being told she wasn't good enough, that she was failing her. The investigation lasted 2 weeks, the longest 2 weeks of her daughter's life. They interviewed her mother, who told them terrible stories about how her daughter mistreated her, stories that existed only in her diseased mind. They interviewed her daughter's family, some of whom defended her, while others wondered aloud if maybe she really was overwhelmed. They examined her medical records, her finances, her living conditions. In the end, they found no evidence of abuse, but the damage was done. The doubt had been planted, the questions raised. The worst part was that her daughter started to doubt herself. Maybe she was too controlling. Maybe she was making mistakes. Maybe the exhaustion and stress were making her less patient than she should be. The guilt was overwhelming, a constant weight that made it hard to breathe. She was being punished for loving too much, for caring too deeply, for refusing to abandon the woman who had never abandoned her. She made the hardest decision of her life. She stepped back. Not completely, because she could never abandon her entirely, but she hired a home health aide named Maria and reduced her visits to twice a week. The guilt was crushing, but she had to save what was left of her marriage, her relationship with her children, and her own rapidly deteriorating sanity. She felt like she was drowning, and if she didn't grab onto something solid soon, she would go under completely. Maria was a godsend. A kind, patient woman from Guatemala who had been caring for Alzheimer's patients for 15 years. She spoke to the mother in gentle Spanish mixed with English, calling her mi amor and querida. But even with professional help, the mother's condition deteriorated rapidly without her daughter's constant presence. She became more agitated, more confused, more lost in the labyrinth of her own mind. The reports her daughter received from Maria were heartbreaking. The mother was sleeping 14 hours a day, eating only when coaxed, retreating further into a world where none of them could follow. "She asks for her daughter every day," Maria told her daughter over the phone, her voice heavy with sympathy. She says, "When is my daughter coming to visit?" And I tell her, "You were here yesterday," but she doesn't remember. She gets so sad, like she's been forgotten. The irony was devastating. The mother was asking for her daughter, while her daughter was sitting in her own kitchen. But her daughter she was asking for was someone who existed only in her fading memory, a daughter who was young and whole and hadn't yet been broken by the weight of caregiving. Her daughter's visits became exercises in navigating a landscape of confusion and fear. The mother would greet her politely, the way she'd greet any visitor, offering her coffee and asking if she'd driven far to get there. Sometimes she'd tell her daughter about her daughter Sarah, speaking about her in the third person while her daughter sat right in front of her. "She's such a good girl," she'd say, "but she's been so busy lately. I haven't seen her in ages." Her daughter would smile and nod, agreeing that Sarah sounded wonderful, that she was probably just busy with work and family. Then, on a Thursday afternoon that her daughter will never forget, Maria called her with excitement in her voice. "You need to come," she said. "She found something and she's been crying, but it's different crying. Happy crying, maybe?" Her daughter drove to her mother's house with her heart pounding, not knowing what to expect. She found her mother sitting in her favorite chair by the window, holding a small wooden music box, one her daughter had made for her in her high school woodworking class 25 years ago. The music box was playing Edelweiss, the tiny metal mechanism creating a delicate melody that filled the quiet room. Her mother was crying, but Maria was right. These were different tears. Not the frustrated tears of confusion or the frightened tears of paranoia, but something softer, deeper. "This song," she whispered to Maria, her voice filled with wonder, "this song means something important. I can feel it in my heart, but I can't remember what it means or where it came from." Her daughter sat beside her on the couch, moving slowly so she wouldn't startle her. Her mother looked at her with those clouded blue eyes, and for just a moment, her daughter saw something flicker there. Not recognition exactly, but something warmer than the usual polite confusion. She didn't know her daughter's name, didn't know she was her daughter, but she knew her daughter was safe. She knew her daughter belonged in that moment with her. "Do you know this song?" she asked her daughter, holding the music box like it was made of precious crystal. Her daughter nodded, not trusting her voice. "It's Edelweiss," she managed to say. "Someone who loved you very much gave this to you." Her mother smiled then, the first genuine smile her daughter had seen from her in months. "Someone who loved me," she repeated softly. "Yes, I can feel that. Even if I can't remember who or when or why." They sat together in that golden afternoon light, listening to the music box play the same melody over and over. Her mother didn't know her daughter was her daughter, didn't remember the nights her daughter had been sick and she'd sung this song to comfort her, didn't remember making this music box together in her garage workshop. But something deeper than memory was stirring. The love that existed in her bones, in her DNA, in the very core of who she was. When the music box finally wound down, she looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sitting with me," she said. "It's been so lonely and I don't know why." Her daughter took her hand and she let her hold it. "You're not alone," her daughter told her. "You are so loved, even if you can't remember it right now." Her daughter started writing everything down with the desperate urgency of someone trying to save a burning library. Every story, every memory, every moment of their life together went into notebook after notebook, filling page after page with the details of who her mother was before Alzheimer's stole her away. She wrote about how her mother made her famous apple pie, measuring ingredients by feel rather than recipes. She wrote about how her mother would dance around the kitchen while cooking Sunday dinner, humming old Irish songs her mother had taught her. She wrote about how her mother would slip $20 bills into her pocket when her daughter wasn't looking, whispering, "Buy yourself something pretty, sweetheart." The notebooks became her daughter's obsession and her salvation. She filled them with her mother's dreams, how she'd always wanted to visit Ireland, how she'd planned to learn to paint watercolors when she retired. She wrote about her mother's fears, her terror of spiders, her worry that she wasn't a good enough mother, her anxiety about money that stemmed from growing up poor. She documented her mother's proudest moments, her daughter's graduation from college, her daughter's wedding day, the birth of each grandchild. She recorded her mother's silliest jokes, her favorite movies, the way she'd cried during Hallmark commercials. One evening, as the sun was setting through the windows of her mother's living room, her daughter brought the notebooks to her house. Her mother was sitting in her favorite chair, the blue velvet one that had been her father's, staring out at the garden she no longer remembered planting. The roses were blooming, deep red ones that she'd planted for their 25th anniversary, white ones that reminded her of her wedding bouquet. She was looking at them like they were beautiful but completely foreign, like artwork in a museum. "Would you like me to tell you a story?" her daughter asked, settling into the chair beside her mother with the first notebook in her lap. Her mother turned to her daughter with that polite smile she gave to all the kind strangers who visited her now. "I love stories," she said, her voice soft and expectant. "What kind of story is it?" Her daughter opened the notebook to the first page, where she'd written about the day her mother met her father at a church dance in 1962. "It's about a love story," her daughter said, "about a woman who wore a blue dress and spilled coffee on herself because she was nervous about dancing with a handsome stranger." As her daughter read, she watched her mother's face carefully, searching for any flicker of recognition, any spark of memory. She told her mother about their first date, how her father had taken her to see Lawrence of Arabia and bought her popcorn and junior mints. She read about their wedding day, how her mother had worn her grandmother's pearls and cried during the ceremony because she was so happy. She described the birth of their first child, how her mother had held the baby and said, "Hello, my little love, I've been waiting for you." Her mother listened with the careful attention of someone hearing a fascinating story about strangers, nodding at the romantic parts, smiling at the funny moments. When her daughter read about the day her mother had taught her daughter to ride a bicycle, running alongside the wobbling bike and calling out, "I've got you, sweetheart! I won't let you fall!" she clapped her hands together with delight. "What a good mother," she said. That little girl was lucky to have someone who cared so much. Her daughter read for 2 hours, taking her mother through decades of love and loss, joy and sorrow, ordinary moments that had made up an extraordinary life. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a long time, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant but peaceful. Then she reached over and patted her daughter's hand with surprising warmth. "Thank you, dear," she said softly. "That was the most beautiful story I've ever heard. That woman, she sounded like she was very loved. She sounded like she had a wonderful life." Her daughter squeezed her hand and smiled through her tears. "She did," she whispered. "She was loved more than she ever knew. And she still is." Her mother smiled then, that radiant smile that had always been able to light up any room. "I'm so glad," she said. "Everyone should be loved like that. Everyone should have someone who remembers their story." In that moment, her daughter understood something profound. It didn't matter that her mother couldn't remember her name or recognize her face. What mattered was that her daughter could remember hers. Her daughter would carry her mother's memories when she no longer could. She would be her keeper of stories, her guardian of love, her witness to a life beautifully lived. Her mother had given her 42 years of unconditional love, and now her daughter would give her the gift of remembering, of keeping her story alive, even when she couldn't tell it herself. Her daughter realized then that love doesn't require recognition to exist. It creates its own truth, its own permanence. Her mother had forgotten her, but her daughter would remember her for both of them. In her notebooks, in her heart, in the way she would tell her story to her own children, Margaret O'Sullivan Patterson would live forever, whole and complete and deeply, deeply loved. She keeps that wooden music box on her kitchen counter now, next to a framed photo of her mother from her wedding day. Her mother's hair is perfectly curled, her smile radiant with joy and hope for the future. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and she's drinking her morning coffee, she winds up the music box and lets Edelweiss play, while she watches the sun rise through her kitchen window. The melody fills the silence and reminds her that love doesn't require memory to exist. It creates its own truth, its own permanence, its own defiance against forgetting. In the end, Alzheimer's took her mother's words, her memories, her ability to recognize the faces of the people who loved her most. It stole her independence, her dignity, her sense of self, but it couldn't take the 42 years of love they shared, the foundation her mother had built in her, the way she'd shaped her into the woman she became. Those things live in her now, safe from any disease, protected by the simple fact that she chooses to remember them, to honor them, to carry them forward. Memory can disappear, but sometimes love remains to remember who we are. If you know someone caring for a family member with Alzheimer's, send them this story. They need to know their love matters, even when it feels invisible. Share so more caregivers feel seen and valued.